Professor Andrew Dolkart comes to us. He has been for a number of years now Professor of Historic Preservation at the Columbia University Graduate School of Architecture, Planning, and Preservation, only the second tenured director in the entire history. He has a number of studies, all of which he has received tremendous awards for, including Morningside Heights, a history of its architecture and development, biography of a tenement house in New York City, so he understands where we're heading on Sunday, to be sure. In 2002, he published Central Synagogue in Its Changing Neighborhood, did a beautiful job, and that caught our attention because how about a little West Side Rodeph Sholom action? And so we asked Professor Dolkart if he would research and come up with as many answers to our questions as he possibly could. So we are very excited to introduce and bring to the Bima Professor Andrew Dolkart. Can you speak from here or go right into the mic? Because they need to hear you.
Well, thank you very much. I'm really thrilled to be here. And I want to thank Rabbi Levine and especially Gina Levine for inviting me to undertake this project, which has been really exciting. And I've got the pleasure of working in the archive here with Mary Harkavy and Chuck Weiss, who really went out of their way to answer all my queries. And also I want to thank Amy Lippin for showing me around practically every inch of this building. So here we are this evening, opening the celebration of the 175th anniversary of Congregation Rodeph Sholom, the fourth oldest Jewish congregation in New York City, founded in 1842 by German Jewish immigrants. We are celebrating tonight in the congregation's third major home. First, the building on Clinton Street on the Lower East Side, where the celebration will continue on Sunday. Then the building on Lexington Avenue and 63rd Street that the rabbi mentioned, that was originally Congregation Bethel. And now this extraordinary sanctuary, dating from 1927 to 30. It is this building which an editorial in the Jewish Tribune saw as, quote, symbolizing the prosperous growth of this country's Jewish population, that I want to talk about tonight. And I'm using slides, but a lot of what we're going to talk about is all around here, but I thought there were some things that it would be hard to see, so thus the images. Rodeph Sholom moved from the Lower East Side to the former home of Congregation Bethel on Lexington Avenue in 1889, at a time when the Upper East Side was developing as an upper-middle-class neighborhood with many Jewish residents and several prominent synagogues. The building was only 8 blocks north of Central Synagogue. But New York is always changing and populations constantly moving. By the 1920s, affluent Jews were moving in large numbers to the Upper West Side, coinciding with the development of large apartment buildings in the neighborhood. These are the buildings I'm sure a lot of you live in, creating what would remain for many decades, and in many ways still is, the city's most prosperous, heavily Jewish neighborhood. One commentator wrote that the Upper West Side was an upper-middle-class Jewish neighborhood whose Jordan and Levantine shores are defined by Central Park West and West End Avenue. 86th Street is the main street of the most compact and prosperous Jewish community in the city of New York. A 1922 list of Rodeph Sholom's committee members listed their addresses, and even as early as 1922, over 50% of the committee members lived on the Upper West Side. As Jewish populations shifted, synagogues moved as well, with a number of temples moving from the East Side or from Harlem, almost all acquiring mid-block sites in what was already a heavily built-up neighborhood. And this is a really interesting thing about this building and synagogues in general on the Upper West Side. I'm very interested in how you can learn about neighborhoods by looking at the religious institutions and how they ebb and flow through a neighborhood. And if you think about the original development of the neighborhood as row houses, the area was filled with Protestant churches on corner sites. Think of West End Avenue, 86th Street in Amsterdam, 79th Street and Broadway. By the time Jews, and in fact Catholics as well, began to move to the Upper West Side in the 19-teens and the 1920s, the neighborhood was largely built up. The corner sites were not available or were super expensive. And so almost every synagogue is on a mid-block site in the neighborhood. In 1926, the Rodeph Sholom congregation voted on whether to sell its Lexington Avenue property and move, even though a new location had not yet been chosen. For a brief period, the board discussed merging with Central Synagogue and also considered trying to purchase Don D. Rockefeller's Park Avenue Baptist Church on 64th Street, since that congregation was moving to Riverside Church. This is a complete mystery to me, why they were interested in this. The building wasn't really conducive to synagogue use. Oops, getting ahead of ourselves here. What happened? There we go. Park Avenue Baptist Church on 64th Street. Since this congregation was moving, it wasn't conducive to synagogue use, and it's only a couple of blocks from their other building, but they offered $1 million for this building, but nothing came of that. The search for a new site soon focused on the Upper West Side, particularly in the West 80s, and in 1926, the current site, occupied then by 8 row houses, was purchased. Services moved to Mecca Temple, a Masonic hall that you all know as City Center on 55th Street. Meanwhile, the trustees were involved with another architectural project, building a gatehouse and chapel at the congregation's Union Field Cemetery, designed by Charles B. Myers. After much discussion, in 1927, Myers was hired as the architect for the new synagogue and community house, a project that Rabbi Rudolph Grossman referred to as the Temple Center. Charles Bradford Myers is not exactly a household name today, except maybe in my household. So who was he? As a Jew of German ancestry, who actually lived on West 86th Street, and who ran a professional business, Myers had much in common with members of the synagogue's Board of Trustees. Myers was a graduate of City College and of Pratt Institute, but like most Jewish architects in the early decades of the 20th century, he did not receive commissions for prestigious houses and commercial buildings, but worked primarily for Jewish developers, designing tenements, apartment houses, and garment lofts. And here you can see an apartment house in Washington Heights, the Nathan Hale, and a garment loft on 8th Avenue. And I knew Charles Myers because I'm writing a book on the architecture of the garment loft. And so he designed a lot of garment loft buildings. He also received work from Jewish institutions, including 2 other synagogues, Ohab Zedek on West 93rd Street and Yeshiva College in Washington Heights, now Yeshiva University. For Rodeph Sholom, Myers designed one of the largest synagogues in New York, which he described as, quote, following the Romanesque of the 11th and 12th centuries, accepting that liberty has been taken to better adapt the forms of such an early style or period of architecture to the modern conditions. In other words, the exterior was loosely modeled on Romanesque precedents, notably the use of round arches and the mosaic inlay of polished stone on the exterior. So here's what it's loosely based on. On the left, you can see Bamberg Cathedral in Germany. And if you notice the triple windows over here, triple windows, and especially notice the double arches and then a round circle above, exactly what we have over here. And this is Saint-Nectaire in the Auvergne in Paris, in France. And you can see the star patterns in stonework on Saint-Nectaire, and then here's a similar kind of thing on the facade of Rodeph Sholom. But these were used in a modern manner, evident in the modern simplicity of the facade with its unornamented walls and in other details that we'll discuss. This differs markedly from the predominant style popular for synagogues of the era, with a monumental central arch flanked by massive walls ornamented with somewhat Byzantine or Middle Eastern details in the arch. As you can see here, in the center is B'nai Jeshurun on West 88th Street, which is the first synagogue in America in this style, and on the right is Ohab Zedek. And you can see how it's quite different in its massing. For a building with such a long street, and also at Temple Emmanuel, which was built at exactly the same time as this synagogue. For a building with such a long street facade, a central entrance would have been impractical. So here the facade focuses on 3 monumental arches lighting the sides of the auditorium, these 3 windows over here, with geometric detail and stylized foliage, as well as capitals with Jewish symbols. And you can see there's a lion in one of the capitals. The texture of the limestone on the facade is variegated, some smooth and some rough, as if to give a sense that the building had been standing here for hundreds of years and some of the blocks were deteriorating. So there's this sense of instant age to the building. In contrast to the other synagogues that we just saw, the actual entrance to Rodeph Sholom is rather modest. The largely monochromatic austerity of the exterior of the synagogue belies the richness of the interior. One enters into a vaulted lobby with Italian travertine walls and multicolored terrazzo floor. You can see the floor on the bottom right. Terrazzo is crushed marble that you can pour, that gets poured into molds. If you look carefully, there are little silver frames in which the terrazzo would have been poured to give you these patterns. The glorious sanctuary opens off the lobby. When you enter, and think about this next time you come in here, when you enter from the rear, the focus is on the bima. At this juncture, you can see the bima, but do not yet have any inkling of the actual breadth of this space. As you walk down one of the aisles, it becomes evident that the sanctuary is an enormous volume. This sense of volume, of a congregation sitting within a grand sacred space, is an important element of synagogue design, especially in the 1920s. And you can see this in a lot of the great synagogues of the 1920s. Here, you can see it at some of the other great synagogues of the period. This is Isaiah Israel in Chicago from 1924, also with a monumental interior. And you'll notice triple arches on the outside. Tifereth Israel in Cleveland, similar in its form, and probably most close to this building, Temple Shalom in Chicago from 1928 to 30, exactly the same time this building was built, also in a modernized Romanesque style. Myers designed the space at Rodeph Sholom in a sophisticated manner. Attention is always focused on the bima and the ark, as is appropriate in a Jewish house of worship. The auditorium is arranged in a non-hierarchical manner. That is, it's hard to know where the best seat in the house is. There really isn't one. The 1,320 seats are on pews probably made out of birch. There was a discussion as to whether they should be birch or walnut. I contacted a colleague who's an expert in wood, and he said it's definitely not walnut, but he couldn't guarantee that it was birch. But I think that they're birch, ornamented with 3 different plant designs. The walls are relatively austere, faced in plaster that was tinted in imitation of stone blocks, and you can see that all around. As on the exterior, with its different stone finishes that create the effect of age, the plaster blocks were tinted different colors. And on the left, you can see the original look, and then this interior was painted. It was painted for the first time in the 1980s. So on the right is a current. So it's a little bit different. It's the same idea, but it's a little bit different. The unornamented walls contrast dramatically with the ceiling. As you look up, you can see with its massive beams, smaller diagonals creating coffers or domes. The ceiling is richly polychromatic with stars and sunbursts and vines and other details. Spangled with stars in the Renaissance fashion, to quote the Jewish Tribune's review of the building. The current decoration appears also to date from the 1980s and is close to, but not identical to, the original detail. An interesting feature of the interior is that, with the exception of the ark, overt religious symbolism is extremely subtle. If you look carefully, you'll begin to see many 6-pointed stars in the windows, in the top, in the round circles in the windows. You can't see it in the dark, but you can see it here. There's a star, 6-pointed stars in the grills, up in the bima, and in the metal vents in the ceiling. And this is very hard to see. When Amy and I were walking around, she said, "Oh, look, there are stars of David in the grills." And she saw it right away, and I had to stare for a long time before I actually could see the pattern in it. But all those triangles up in the ceiling are metal grills with stars of David in them. One thing that is important to notice is that this space is not a perfect rectangular box. but has angled facets supporting the roof, giving the room a crystal shape. And you can see that on either side. Where the blue stars are, you can see it's angled or faceted. This was a very modern feature in 1929. The late 1920s was the height of interest in Art Deco design, and an important feature of many Art Deco buildings is the use of crystalline shapes, as is evident, for example, at the entrance to the Chrysler building, erected at exactly the same time as Rodeph Sholom, and you can see that on the right. Other Art Deco motifs are evident here as well, especially the use of geometric patterns and zigzag forms, often zigzags with sunbursts or flower petals in them, as you can see on the facade over here and on the wall flanking the main entrance on the right. On the stair rails, you can see there's a zigzag pattern at the top of the stair rail. In the handsome woodwork within the boardroom, and also in the meeting room, off the president's room here off the lobby. And in the ornament on the ceiling domes, where you can see it's a zigzag sort of star with sunbursts coming out of it, and they're in each one of the domes. Major design emphasis is, of course, the bima and the arc. The bima is the most complex part of the design. It's framed by an ornamental cast stone arch that's here. Its walls are quite complex. The perforated screens that you can see up here, they were, I believe, planned for acoustics when the synagogue had a pipe organ. Because organs were always controversial in synagogues, the organ and its pipes were always out of sight, and the sound from the organ generally appeared to emanate from heaven. Also on the bima is a half dome with complex stenciling, and I think you can see that up here. If you look carefully, you will see that all of the panels are a similar pattern, but one panel is a different color than the others, primarily blue and red with gold highlights, while the others are primarily gold. And I'm almost certain that the blue panel is original and that the others were redone in the 1980s. And you can see if you compare the color contrast here with an all black and white image, you can see that this is probably the original. The dynamism of the bima is heightened by the thin columns that appear to be different kinds of marble, and you can see them right here. They're all around. They appear to be different kinds of marble. They are not, however, real marble. Rather, they're something called scagliola, a plaster material with a decorative finish resembling various kinds of marble. This imitative material is a complex art form, not a cheap substitute material for marble. It has a long history in architecture at the absolute highest level, as you can see here in these two 18th century English country houses designed by the great architect Robert Adam, Kettleston Hall and Sion House. We're zipping ahead here. These pilasters are scagliola, and these columns are all scagliola. So we're not talking about a cheap, phony material. The columns, by the way, are purely decorative. They have no symbolic value. Also of note is the pulpit, originally a single unit, which you can see. Which you can see in the photo here on the left. It was a single unit that was split in two in 1961 in order to improve the view towards the ark. Although I'm not positive, I think that the marble and mosaic detail on this pulpit is original, and the other one is a careful copy. I'm not positive about that, but I've looked at them very carefully for a long time. The mosaics here and on the ark were created by the Ravenna Mosaic Company of Berlin, named for the Italian city with its spectacular early mosaics. This company created some of the most important mosaics in New York, including those at 1 Wall Street, the Irving Trust Company building, one of the great interiors in America, at St. Bartholomew's, and at Temple Emmanuel. Appropriately, the artistic culmination of the synagogue is the ark, with its real marble detail, its Ravenna mosaic work, and one of the great works of art of the late 1920s in New York, the extraordinary ark doors. The doors were the work of Meyer, the architect, Charles Meyer, working with Oscar Bach, a German-born and trained metal worker who was among the most successful artists in metal of the era. His workshop manufactured hundreds of pieces of furniture and decorative arts, but also worked on some of the most prestigious architectural projects of the day, creating metal for many different architects. These include the Empire State Building, the Chrysler Building on your left, the Roundels outside Radio City Music Hall, and the Ark at the Bethel Chapel at Temple Emmanuel, which also is Ravenna mosaic work. The magazine Metal Arts reported in 1930 that this was metalwork of unusual beauty, enriching Temple Rodeph Sholom. Like Myers in architecture, Bach sought to draw from the best traditions of the past and use them to create modern artwork. The ark doors are incredibly complex, with multiple metals combined to create this masterpiece filled with Jewish symbolism. The framework of the door, that is this piece here, the framework of the door is steel, hand engraved with running ornament. At the intersections here are bronze bosses that metal art reported added to the sense of massiveness and dignity. The square panels are pierced wrought iron. That's this, pierced wrought iron with hand forged, oh no, I'm sorry. This is pierced, this is, the square panels are hammered steel. Sorry, that's this, hammered steel with bronze borders. And the inner panels are pierced wrought iron with hand-forged frames. Through the piercing is hammered iron covered with blue-green enamel. You can see them in the background. Within the various motifs of the pierced design, all along here, are little sterling silver bosses, the little sterling silver inlays. And then there are copper symbols with gold plating on them. So an amazing complexity of metals. The critic from metal arts gushed that the varied tones of the lustrous metal, the rich patina, and the beautiful enamel and gold for the finish is worthy of the excellence of the design and metalwork. Bach also designed the menorahs that are on either side. They used to stand right here, and they're kind of lost, and probably a lot of you have never looked at them, and they're well worth taking a look. They have symbols of the 12 tribes of Israel on them. And he also designed the stair rails and the chandeliers that hang in the lobby and in the second floor lobby. So the synagogue remained in very good repair for the first several decades. In the post-war period, Rodeph Sholom's congregation declined in size as many families moved to the suburbs. Indeed, in 1949, the synagogue had an option to purchase the 2 row houses immediately to the east at 3 to 5 East 83rd Street for all of $60,000 for the pair, where they hoped to expand the number of classrooms, but they dropped the idea because in 1950, the trustees reported that there had been a marked drop this year in enrollment of new children. The decline in the congregation coincided with the aging of the building and deterioration to the physical fabric. By the 1960s, some leaks had caused damage to the plaster and the facade was dirty. This led to a major restoration that appears to have occurred in 1986, including the renewal of much of the sanctuary's colorful ornament, a renewal that symbolically also represented the renewal of the congregation as the Upper West Side again became one of New York's most popular neighborhoods. When services at Rodeph Sholom were inaugurated in March 1930, the building was heralded as one of great beauty. The board of the synagogue was so elated that they elected Charles Meyer a trustee, writing that the new synagogue was, quote, truly representative of and typifies in material form the high ideals, traditions, and aspirations of our beloved congregation. The majestic lines of the exterior, the inspiring warmth of the interior, and their combined beauty are the creation, they said, of a great architect. This building is indeed one of the preeminently beautiful buildings in America, as the Jewish Tribune wrote, and, to quote American Hebrew magazine, a triumph of rare architectural beauty. Thank you. And if anybody's interested, before the Oneg Shabbat, if you want to come up for just a minute or two and look at the Ark doors if you've never seen them, they are an extraordinary work of art. I'm happy to stay up here with you.
Thank you, Andrew.